Roberta Clowater says New Brunswick's highest peak is no place to put a snowmobile trail. But the executive director of the provincial chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society says that's the plan New Brunswick's Snowmobile Federation has worked out with the Department of Tourism. A $1.5 to $2 million project creating a trail up the mountain that's 12 feet wide. And she's warning the public so it doesn't happen. And Roberta Clowater is with me in the studio now. Good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Hi. Morning, Terry.
Okay. How did you find out about the plan?
I happened to be at a meeting with a committee that helps to manage the protected natural areas for the Department of Natural Resources. And the Snowmobile Federation came in to tell that committee about potential impacts on protected natural areas on Crown land. And as an accident, he also was talking about the fact that they were going up Mount Carleton. And so I quickly tried to find out more information about it and contacted people at the Department of Tourism and Heritage and Culture.
What did you find out?
That they didn't have an awful lot of answers for me, that they didn't seem to really know very much about the details of the plan to widen the trail at Mount Carleton. All we knew was that the trail would be widened. Since then, there have been a few meetings where people from the Snowmobile Federation have been able to provide the answers about how wide the trail will be widened and also how high. So we have even more concerns based upon the information that we have heard, but it was quite concerning to know that there wasn't even a plan written down that we could read and evaluate for its merits.
How does something that is done in that way make it to the stage where it's going to happen?
Well, that's what we're quite concerned about, especially when we learned that the trail, the development process would be happening this fall. And yet none of the groups that care about parks or that have an interest in what happens with Mount Carleton or other provincial parks had heard about it up until now. And if by accident I hadn't heard about it, I'm not sure that any of us still would have known.
So what is the problem?
Well, this kind of a development would normally not be consistent with what happens in the wildest parts of wilderness parks. And Mount Carleton, in 2014, the Revised Parks Act designated Mount Carleton as a wilderness provincial park. So it's our only wilderness provincial park, and it's one of our largest wilderness parks that we have in the province. And to allow motorized vehicles up the side of Mount Carleton is not something that would normally be consistent with how you manage wilderness.
What would the consequence of allowing that trail be?
Well, because they have to widen to allow the snowmobile groomer to go up the trail, they'll basically be doubling the width of the trail, in many places at least. And also they have to cut the canopy of the trees up to a height of 12 feet. So they're going to be actually fragmenting that trail quite a bit. It could have an impact on the movement of different kinds of wildlife, flying squirrels or American marten or other wildlife that use that part of the park. So it could have some impacts on wildlife. We don't know because they haven't done any studies. It also could lead to a lot more erosion by having that trail groomed and motorized vehicle use on it. It could cause a lot of erosion on that trail. And also when the rain beats down, once you pack down the soil too much, it'll just run off.
Is Mount Carleton designated a wilderness park? Is that a specific designation?
Yes, it's legally designated as a wilderness park.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, that's the question, is that when they made the revisions to the legislation, they were supposed to go ahead and develop management plans for all of the provincial parks. They haven't done that yet for any of them, and Mount Carleton included. So they don't have, they haven't done the public consultation or involved the stakeholders in a discussion about what that means yet. And yet here they are going ahead with this kind of development. So to us, this is really the first test of that new law, which we've been applauding across the country as being something that can really modernize our approach to the management of New Brunswick's provincial parks. So we're quite concerned that this decision is being made despite the fact that we haven't gotten there with respect to a management plan that says, what does it mean for us to have a wilderness provincial park? What's allowed in the different parts of the park? And how do we protect the natural areas that are in the park that are so important to the way that we market it to tourists?
Who has the responsibility within government to say, hold on a second, let's just figure out what the potential impacts of this project are before we give you a green light to proceed?
Well, it is the Ministry of Tourism, Heritage and Culture is the department that works on this particular issue.
And is there any precedent that you could point to where that kind of investigation, that kind of analysis has been done before a project is given the go-ahead?
Well, I think that we don't have, in my experience, we don't have a great culture historically of doing that here with respect to our parks, which is why the Parks Act was revised. So we would modernize our approach and actually bring in stakeholders and bring in people who are knowledgeable about these kinds of things and have a discussion with the public about what's appropriate for our parks. And the public really supported that when they made those changes. So it is something that we need to get to, and I believe that within the department they must have just dropped the ball, and they were used to doing things a different way, and really haven't given any thought to what might the red flags be with respect to this, and who should we talk to about them, and how do we investigate what the impacts might be.
So what has to happen now?
Well, we're recommending that government take a step back and not proceed with this particular trail up the side of Mount Carleton, and they do the required work to figure out what this would mean, investigate what the impacts might mean for erosion and for wildlife and for also for conflicts with wilderness users, because if there are snowmobiles going through, it's not necessarily the kind of wilderness experience that snowshoers or cross-country skiers are going to be enjoying at the same time. So there's lots of consultation work that needs to be done, I think, and we don't actually know if they've consulted with the Aboriginal people, Indigenous people. So there are all kinds of questions that we don't have the answers for. We do have, yesterday the minister called me and we have set up a meeting to go up to Mount Carleton and actually talk about what the options are. So I'm hoping it's a good sign that we might have an opening here, but I'm very concerned that the process has gone so far without any engagement of people who might have concerns about it.
The minister called you? How did he know? Had he become aware of your concern?
Well, I had already written a letter to the minister back in early August, so the minister has been aware of my concern for a while now, and but when I sent out a news release yesterday,
that's when you got the call?
Yes, so.
Some people might wonder how significant the damage could be just by expanding a 6-foot trail to 12 feet. I mean, really, how significant could the environmental impact be?
Well, I think that we have to hold our only wilderness provincial park to a higher standard than we would to a snowmobile trail that's happening elsewhere on Crown land. And we really need to be thinking about what is consistent. We have so few parks and protected areas in New Brunswick. Only 4.5% of the province is legally designated as protected, and Mount Carleton is one of the largest pieces. And it's the jewel in the crown of the provincial park system. Mount Carleton itself is the highest point in the Maritimes. It's iconic to the tourism attraction and the wilderness marketing potential for that provincial park. And we really should hold it to everything that we do in there should be held to a higher standard than what happens elsewhere on Crown land.
If the government agreed to do analysis of the potential impact on the environment of building the trail, and the analysis came back and said it'll be benign, it's not going to have much of an impact at all, would your opposition disappear?
I think that it would be quite hard to convince us that there would be no environmental impact, but it would also be really difficult for us to say, okay, well, everybody else in North America has decided that in wilderness zones, in wilderness parks, snowmobiling doesn't happen. They're not building a snowmobile trail up the side of Mount Carleton in Baxter State Park. They're not building wilderness or snowmobile trails in the wilderness zones of Fundy National Park. So in areas that are like this, they don't manage them this way, and there's a reason for that, because we actually want to have some parts of the province where those kinds of activities aren't happening. It doesn't mean that they can't be elsewhere in the park. It just means up the side of Mount Carleton is not the most appropriate location for it.
Yeah, you can just see, though, somebody has made a convincing argument that allowing this to happen would result in revenue being generated for many people.
Right.
And so you can understand why the government would say, well, given the state of the economy, then anything we can do to increase revenue generation, that is a good thing.
Yeah. I would be surprised if that part of their snowmobile plan is so integral to the attraction for tourists. I doubt that they're going to get as many people who want necessarily go up there, but even if they did, what about the revenue generation that we're foregoing by not allowing the other kinds of wilderness users to be using that part of the park in the way that they want to? So it is a balancing act, and every time you're managing a park, and especially a wilderness park, it's a balancing act. But you don't do the balancing act without having that discussion publicly, and that's why we've brought this to the media. Normally we would want to take time to talk to the people, but we didn't have time to take because the construction and the clearing of the trees is probably going to happen next month.
I'd just like to be clear on your position on snow machines in the park generally. Are you saying that you're okay with snow machines in Mount Carleton Park, but you're not okay with them going up the side of the mountain?
We think that there are a few roads that already have motorized vehicle access that could be groomed for snowmobile use in other flat parts of the park, okay, where there's already some development in areas around the campground and areas that are already existing roads. But we don't think they should be off trail, and we think that those roads should be very specifically designated and not in the parts of the park that are the wildest parts, and that's where Mount Carleton is.
So when you have this meeting with the minister and you go to Mount Carleton, are you hoping that you're going to be able to convince him to put this project on hold?
That's what I'm hoping. That the minister will put this particular part of the all the rest of the snowmobile trails probably could go ahead, but this particular one, I think they need to take a second look at it and figure out, they need to do their due diligence, because certainly I don't believe that they've been making informed decisions when they don't actually have answers to a lot of these questions.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Terry.
Roberta Clowater is Executive Director of the New Brunswick chapter of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, or known by the acronym CPAWS. Just a note here, we asked the president of the New Brunswick Snowmobile Federation, Brad Mann, for an interview this morning about his group's plan for Mount Carleton. He did not return our calls. We also asked Bill Fraser, the Minister of Tourism, to come on the show and explain what was going to happen. His office said he was unavailable. Any thoughts on the plan for a Mount Carleton snowmobile trail? What do you think should happen? You can reach me directly on Twitter at my address, at SEGUINCBC. You can also use the show's Twitter account, at InfoAMFred. You can also send your email to infoamfrederickton@cbc.ca. Nikki Terrio writes on Twitter, "We are in need of another ATV trail that much? Really? Just let the wilderness live where it belongs, please." Feel free to join the conversation.